So on the concept of rates, ratios, and proportions, just as a quick reminder, this is something that we have talked about in pre-algebra in years past as well as in the previous math classes. A ratio is a comparison between two quantities using division. Remember that the whole purpose of a division symbol is to represent a fraction, numerator over denominator, and that's the reason why they made that the fraction and the division symbol look similar. So anytime you see a fraction, it really is a division problem. And anytime you see a division problem, it can be written as a fraction. So if I was to talk about the ratio of x and y, you can say that x is related to y, x is related to y, x is related to y. These are all the three different ways that you can express ratios. A rate is pretty much a ratio, but the difference is that it uses two different units. So, for example, 34 miles in 2 gallons or 34 miles per 2 gallons, these are rates because you're using miles and gallons. They are two totally different units. Miles and gallons are different units. So when you use units within the ratio, it is called a rate. A unit rate is basically a rate that is simplified to talk about one specific unit. So the 34 miles per 2 gallons or 34 miles in 2 gallons is really the same thing as 17 miles per 1 gallon. This is a unit rate. Any rate can be converted into a unit rate by division, or by creating a proportion. If you remember from last year and years past, a proportion is an equation that states the two ratios are equal. Another way of looking at it is an analogy. I know that there's lots of words here, so let's go over them and then I'll go through that. When solving a proportion, you use cross products. Cross products is the same as multiplying the means and the extremes. These are just vocabulary words. The extremes are the things that are opposite top left, bottom right. Means top right, bottom left. Just a fancy way of saying something like that. What I was talking about in terms of proportions was that if you were to look at, for example, A is related to B in the same way that C is related to D. Using these words, you can write a proportion. A is to B in the same, remember same is equal, way that C is to D. Cross products means that you cross multiply. This is an equation, which means that when you cross multiply, you're going to get an equation. A times D must equal B times C. This is used when you're trying to solve an unknown quantity. So if we move into the next problem, the ratio of games won to lost for a baseball team is 3-2. The team won 18 games. How many games did they lose? Remember, always read to tell a story first before you figure out or try to figure out what it's asking. So we know that we're talking about games won to lost. Now, they want to know how many games did the team lose. The ratio of won to lost, so the 1 is to the lost, 3 won is to 2 lost. The way that they write it, so 1 to lost, means that it's 1 to lost in this manner. The team won 18 games. That would go in the numerator because that's where the 1 goes, as in W-O-N, not the number. So 1 is to lost as 1 is to lost. 3 is to 2. 3-1 is related to 2 lost in the same way that 18-1 is related to how many lost. It's a proportion, which means you cross multiply. 3 times L is equal to 2 times 18, which is 36. You divide by 3 like a regular equation, and you get that L must be 12. That means that if a team won 18 games at a ratio of 3-2, they lost 12. Look at this one. Corey earns $52.50 in 7 hours. Find the unit rate. So we could set up a proportion with this as well. We could say that $52.50 is related to the 7 hours, so money is to hours, as how much money is for 1 hour. That's unit rate. Cross multiply. Let's call this H, or D, probably for dollars, or money, M. It doesn't matter what you want to call it. Let's call it M. 7 times the number of money is equal to $52.50. Yes, the other way of doing it is just dividing, but let's continue with the proportion. Divide by 7, and you get that, and when you use your calculator, because you are allowed to use your calculator, you get that the money was $7.50 per hour. Now, you could have gone from the very beginning and understood that if it's $52.50 in 7 hours, you can just divide. But I do want to make sure that you understand the process of setting up the proportion with the equation. Let's look at the next one. In the past 2 years, a retailer has opened 232 stores. So we're imagining in our head opening stores. If the rate of growth remains constant, so don't worry about the wordage, how many stores will the retailer open in next 3 years? So these words here, the rate of growth remains constant, means that it's proportional. So if you think of these words and they confuse you, just remember that when you see the words rate of growth remains constant, it means that growth is proportional. That's basically saying that growth is proportional. And that just means you can set up a proportion. So if in 2 years they open 232 stores, you could say 232 stores is related to the 2 years. So number of stores is related to number of years. In the same way that how many stores in 3 years? And again, it's a proportion, so you can cross multiply. 2 times n is equal to 232 multiplied by 3, which is 696. Solve your equation by dividing by 2 on both sides, and you get that the number of stores is going to be 348 in 3 years. So when you're setting these up, just think of proportions as analogies. Think of the fact that when you're setting up things, if you can set up an analogy as fraction equal to a fraction, it's a proportion, and then you can go ahead and solve. Then we move forward into solving proportions without words. Simple cross multiplication. Remember, it's an equation, so you have to rewrite an equation. 5 times x is equal to 3 times 3, which is 9. Divide by 5, and you get x is 9/5. And yes, you leave it as an improper fraction, because in algebra, we now just leave things as improper fraction. This is one that I feel you might have an issue with, just simply because of the fact that you're going to forget x minus 2 is one item. So when you go to cross multiply 7 times x minus 2, please remember to put that parentheses, because you're multiplying 7 to the entire x minus 2. That's going to equal 14 times 2, which is 28. Now you can solve for for x. So you could either distribute, or you could think to yourself, let me divide by 7, because that's going to leave x minus 2 by itself. And then I can go ahead and add 2 and get x equals 6. The other way is to distribute. So if you had something that looked like the original, you could have distributed 7x minus 14 equals 28. Then solve your equation like you know how to do. 7x is equal to 42. Divide by 7, and you still get that x is equal to 6. The only reason that this here works is because you're multiplying 7 to the entire x minus 2, and that's the only thing that you're doing to x minus 2. So if you divide it, you can get x minus 2 by itself. Just a little shortcut. And lastly, again, it's a proportion because there's an equal sign and it's two fractions, so you're going to cross multiply. 40 times r, sorry, that looks 40 times r is equal to 8 times 25, which is 200. Divide by 40 on both sides, and you get that r is equal to 5. With this example, example 5, you notice a new word is brought into the word equation. So let's read it first. The scale on a map of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is 3 inches is equal to 10 miles. The length of the Ramsey Cascades Trail is about 1 1/8 inches on the map. What is the actual length of the trail? So the new word that you see is the word scale. When you see this and you see this information there where it says that 3 inches is really equal to 10 miles, what this is saying is, if you can recall, or if you've ever seen a map where they give you like a distance. Now, I'm not a very good artist, but let's say that I was going to draw Florida. Okay, and here's Texas. If that is Florida, and I said to you that the distance from Coconut Creek to Jacksonville is a certain mile. I don't know the exact miles, but if I said to you that every inch was equal to 3 miles, what this is saying is that if you were to measure the distance from here to here, and if that was to give you 1 inch, that here would be 1/3 of 10 miles. Or if I wanted to make it just a little bit bigger, if it was 3 inches long, if this measures 3 inches on the map, in real life it's 10 miles. So that's what they mean by the scale. Now, in order to figure out the question, which is what is the actual length, you have two different situations, two different words that you're thinking of. The first thing is that the map distance is related to the actual distance in the same way, and that's where we would use the equal sign, as the map is related to the actual. So if they gave us that 3 inches is equal to 10 miles, the 3 inches is the map distance. That's what you measured on the map. The 10 miles is the actual distance. So to set up our proportion, what we would do is, taking that idea into account, map is to actual as map is to actual, if they tell you that 3 inches of map is equal to 10 miles of actual, you would write it as 3 inches is to 10 miles. So here this is map is to actual, as they're saying that the length of the map distance is 1 1/8. They're saying what, so that's your unknown, is the actual. And I'm using the letter N instead of X. So again, what we've done here is we've said the map distance that they're giving me of 3 inches is related to the actual distance of 10 miles in the same way that the map distance of 1 1/8 is related to your what, your unknown. This is a proportion, and so to solve it, you would do the same thing that you've done in the other questions. Cross multiply. 3 times n is going to give you the same as, because it's a proportion and cross products are equal, 1 1/8 multiplied by 10. Now this is where your fancy schmancy calculators come into play. because in your calculators, depending on what calculator you have, you can actually use fractions, and you are permitted to do that now that you are in Algebra 1. So I'm going to show you how to use the calculator that I have. I don't know what calculators you guys have. If you got the ones that I sent out a request on at the beginning of the year, I sent out an email asking parents, it was the welcome letter, to get you one of these. This is the calculator that I would recommend, the TI-30XA. So if we want to multiply the 1 1/8 times 10, you would actually punch in here, you would see here, this ABC button represents writing fractions. So if you're going to do 1 1/8 multiplied by 10, you would do 1 and 1/8, 1 over, so it goes 1 and 1 over 8 multiplied by 10 equals 11 and 1/4. So this is 11 and 1 over 4. So when I multiply that over here, that is 11 and 1/4. That's equal to 3n. I'm just going to rewrite it up there. 3n is equal to 11 and 1/4. Don't freak out about fractions. You do have that resource of the calculator now. Now, in order to solve for n, I'm going to divide by 3 to both sides. Now, once more, you can use your calculator. And in order to use your calculator to figure out the division of 11 and 1/4 by 3, if you still have it on the calculator, great. If not, this is how you would do it. You would do 11 and 1 over 4 divided by 3 equals, and that tells it's 3 and 3/4. So the answer after you divide is that n is equal to 3 and 3/4. What this is saying is that if you measure 1 1/8 inches on the map, the actual length is 3 3/4 of a mile, or 3 3/4 miles. And that's your answer. So with that, taking all of that into account, you notice that there's a lot of opportunities to use proportions in word problems. Any type of word problem that is an analogy, that is a statement that you can set up a relationship like here, where you had map distance is to actual distance as map is to actual, you can set up a proportion and cross multiply. So these are the ones that you all are supposed to be working on now. Please do the best you can. Remember that the answers are on the Unit 1 modules link in Canvas. You can find them under completed notes and answers. I do want you to try these on your own and then check your work if necessary, but we will begin with these tomorrow. Take note of this question right here. When you go to cross multiply, please remember that the x minus 2 is one item. So when you go to cross multiply, you're going to multiply the 7 to both the x and the minus 2. And then you're going to cross multiply the 2 and the 14. Okay, see you guys tomorrow.